Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you enjoyed this story. Tonight, we're stepping into the gentle rhythm of falling rain and hushed rooms. A quiet apartment where every footstep echoes like a forgotten whisper. This is a story not about fear, but about stillness. About how even in the loneliest corners of our lives, someone might be reaching out, softly, kindly, just beyond the veil of rain and memory. So take a deep breath. Let the weight of the day slip off your shoulders. You are safe here. You are welcome. And whatever you've carried with you, stress, noise, worries, can rest for a little while. Let the soft sound of the storm guide you inward. Let your breath slow. Let your body sink into the bed or chair where you are. This is your time, your space. The night is long and you are not alone. Tonight's story is called Soggy Footprints, a rainy noir mystery told in quiet steps and gentle shadows. So close your eyes if you'd like, or watch the screen with softened focus. Either way, just listen. The rain has already begun, and somewhere on the second floor of a quiet building, a single footprint waits, wet, out of place, and very much alive. You always found something strangely comforting about the sound of rain. Not the thunder, not the lightning that split the skies like broken glass, but the quiet, rhythmic tapping of water against windows and rooftops. It softened the edges of the world. In your small second-floor apartment, tucked away in an old brick building on a narrow street, that sound had become part of your evenings. An old lullaby you never grew out of. Tonight, it began as a whisper on the roof, barely audible under the low hum of your kettle. You paused, letting the familiarity of it sink in. The rain made the world feel distant, like it was being gently erased behind a watery veil. You poured your tea, the steam fogging up your glasses, and settled into your worn armchair, ready to disappear into another book, while the city outside dissolved into puddles. The room was dim, lit only by a lamp that had a slight flicker in its bulb, something you kept meaning to replace but never did. You liked it that way, warm, quiet, a little imperfect. The rain deepened as night settled in, thudding more insistently against the glass, a metronome for your solitude. The tea warmed your hands. The book was one you had read before, 3 times in fact. But the familiarity was a balm. It was a detective novel, moody and slow, full of fog and cigarette smoke. Outside, headlights passed occasionally, blurred by rain and shadow, but you never looked. You had built your world to face inward, and it had suited you for years. The only thing that ever visited you was silence, and you were fine with that. So when you first saw the wet footprints on the wooden floor, you didn't react right away. They were just there. It took your mind a second to process what your eyes were telling you. Damp, dark marks leading from your front door into the living room. You blinked, glanced at the door, locked. You always locked it. A small habit, born of living alone. You stood slowly, your knees cracking slightly, and approached the marks with the same cautious curiosity you might feel spotting a strange insect on your windowsill. The trail stopped just a few feet in, as though whoever or whatever left them had vanished mid-step. The floor around them was dry. There was no dripping coat, no opened umbrella, no sound of movement. Just you, the rain, and those soggy prints. Your first instinct was practical. Maybe you had stepped out without realizing it. But you hadn't gone outside today. You were sure of it. You'd spent the whole day inside, avoiding the drizzle, reading, brewing tea, dozing off in your chair. No visitors, no deliveries, no opened windows. The prints weren't yours. Too large, spaced differently, like someone taller, heavier had made them. You bent down to touch one. It was wet, cold, and recent. Not muddy, not dirty, just damp, as if someone had walked in from the rain a moment ago. You listened. Nothing but the rain. The air felt heavier suddenly, like someone had whispered something just out of earshot. You turned slowly, scanning the room. Everything was in its place. The coat rack near the door still held your only jacket, dry and untouched. The slippers by your bed remained aligned as always. Even the cup of tea on your side table hadn't cooled yet. Time hadn't passed oddly. You hadn't fallen asleep. You were sure. And yet those prints hadn't been there earlier. They couldn't have been. You were trained to notice things, patterns, small shifts in routine. You weren't paranoid, just tuned in. Living alone teaches you that. And these footprints, they were a disturbance. Not loud, not frightening, but undeniably there, undeniably wrong. You opened the door slowly, expecting perhaps a prank, a neighbor's idea of a joke. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by the wall sconce that buzzed faintly. No sound of steps retreating. No wet trail continuing beyond the threshold. The rain was falling harder now, echoing down the stairwell. But no one was climbing up or down. You closed the door again, slower this time, and locked it. The click sounded louder than usual. When you turned around, the prints were still there, glistening slightly in the warm lamplight, slowly fading as the air dried them. You stood still for a long while, listening, waiting. The floor creaked once, softly, though you hadn't moved. The moment passed, the prints dried. You sat back down, the book resting in your lap now, forgotten. The tea had grown cold. Your eyes drifted toward the space where the footprints had ended, just a few feet from where you now sat. You couldn't shake the feeling that something had entered with the rain, something that wanted to be seen, but not caught, not threatening, just reaching. And somehow, you felt no fear, only a quiet unease that settled like fog in your chest. You didn't speak. There was no one to speak to. But your eyes remained on the floor as you waited to see if the rain would say more. The rest of the night passed uneventfully. You left the light on longer than usual. The book remained unopened. Every few minutes you glanced toward the door. Nothing returned. No new footprints. No other signs. But even after you went to bed, pulling the blanket high and listening to the soft patter on the roof, you couldn't help but feel like you weren't quite alone. Like the rain had brought something with it. Something old, maybe. Or something forgotten. Not a ghost, no. You didn't believe in ghosts. But something. A presence. And it hadn't come to frighten you. It had come to be noticed. And you had. You just didn't know what it wanted yet. The next evening, the sky turned a quiet shade of ash just after sunset. Clouds, gathered with a lazy intention, not rushing, but drifting heavily across the horizon, as though they knew you were waiting. You didn't do much that day, just moved slower than usual, your thoughts preoccupied with what you'd seen, or thought you'd seen, the night before. You'd cleaned the floor, not out of fear or superstition, but because you couldn't bear to see the faint outlines of something you hadn't invited. The memory of the footprints, how they had looked in the yellow light, still sat on your chest like the weight of a forgotten coat. And now, with the clouds preparing to open again, you felt the atmosphere thicken. Something was coming. Not in the way a person comes, more like the return of an idea you tried to forget. By the time the first drops of rain began to hit your window, your hands were already halfway through brewing another cup of tea. It was muscle memory by now, something you did to keep yourself grounded. The kettle hissed softly as the outside world darkened. You turned on the lamp again, the same flickering bulb casting gentle shadows across the walls. It occurred to you then how quiet the rain made everything else. No car horns, no voices from neighboring units, just the steady percussion of water above and around you. And beneath that sound, almost hiding behind it, came something else. The soft creak of a floorboard. You froze, not from fear, but from recognition. You knew that sound. You'd lived alone long enough to catalogue every squeak and moan this old apartment made. This one wasn't from you. You stayed still for a moment, listening. At first, you thought it could be the rain playing tricks on your ears. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Deliberate, slow. Each step was measured, like someone walking barefoot across the wood, leaving behind the same kind of marks you had seen before. You didn't stand up this time. Something told you it wouldn't make a difference. Instead, you turned your head slowly toward the hallway that led to the front door. It was empty. No shape stood there. No shadow moved. But you could feel the presence of motion, the way you can sense someone behind you without seeing them. The air shifted, as though disturbed by a body that wasn't there. The light from the lamp didn't flicker this time, but the silence in between the steps grew louder, like it was holding its breath. The footsteps didn't continue forever. They stopped just as suddenly as they had begun. No crash, no whisper, not even a door creaking. Just an abrupt stillness, as if someone had paused mid-step, deciding whether or not to come closer. You felt your heart beat, not fast, but firm, each thump a steady knock against your ribs. You rose carefully, your feet silent on the floor, and approached the hallway. Again, nothing. But you looked down, and there they were. Fresh, wet footprints, darker than the wood, shimmering faintly. They hadn't been there before. This time, they curved slightly, as if whoever left them had turned to the left. You followed the trail with your eyes. It led not to the living room, but toward the small reading nook by the back window, where your favorite chair sat, a blanket folded neatly over the backrest. You didn't call out. Who would you call to? The prints were the only voice this visitor seemed to have. They said nothing, asked for nothing. They simply appeared. And for some reason, you couldn't bring yourself to feel afraid. Your skin prickled. Yes, and your mind buzzed with 100 questions. But your body remained calm. This wasn't a threat, you told yourself. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like habit, like someone returning to a place they used to know, repeating motions they once made long ago. You took another step toward the chair and noticed the faintest imprint on the seat cushion, barely visible, but enough to make you pause. The kind of mark left behind when someone sits and the fabric remembers. You reached out and touched the cushion, cold, damp, and utterly still. You stood there for a while, letting the moment settle into you. The rain outside grew heavier, and the windows began to fog slightly from the difference in temperature. It made the world outside look like an oil painting, blurry, soft, unreal. And here you were, standing in a quiet apartment, with no sign of forced entry, no figure in the shadows, and yet undeniable proof that something had come in. Something had walked these floors, sat in that chair. You ran your fingers along the window frame behind it, locked, just as you'd left it. No cracks, no broken seal. You looked around, half expecting something to reveal itself now that you were paying attention. But the only sound was the rain and the faint hum of your kettle, long since turned cold. Eventually, the footprints dried, just like the night before. No new ones followed. The presence, whatever it was, seemed to come only with the rain, and only for a moment. Not to linger, not to harm. You sat in the chair after a while, letting the cushion warm beneath your body. There was no wetness now, no mark. It was like the imprint had been waiting for you. You wrapped the blanket over your lap, listening. The rain eased, softening to a whisper, and as it did, the sense of being watched faded. You could almost believe you'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But then you noticed something you hadn't before, a faint scent in the air. Not unpleasant, not familiar, but distinct. A mix of rainwater, old wood, and something floral. A cologne maybe, or perfume. You weren't sure, but you knew it didn't come from you. Later that night, long after the last drop of rain had slid down the glass, you checked the front door again. Still locked. No marks on the outside, no trail on the stairs. You stood there, hand resting on the knob, listening to the emptiness of the hallway. You almost said something, just to hear your voice, to break the stillness, but held back. What would you even say? Hello? Is someone there? That would imply you expected an answer. And deep down, you weren't sure you wanted one. You weren't even sure this was a conversation. Maybe it was just a reminder of what you hadn't yet figured out. So you turned off the lights, returned to your bedroom, and slipped under the covers. The sound of dripping water from the rooftop gutters lingered faintly, like a memory you couldn't quite shake. And just before you drifted into sleep, you thought you heard it again. One seh, just one. Quiet, soft, like someone trying not to wake you. You woke late the next morning. The sky was overcast, though dry, light filtered in dimly through the curtains. A faded grey that cast no shadows. You rose slowly, your body still carrying the weight of the strange quiet from the night before. There was no urgency, no alarm, only a sense of something incomplete. You shuffled toward the kitchen, habitually starting the kettle before glancing around the apartment. Everything was just as you had left it. The reading chair sat beneath the back window still. The hallway stretched out in silence. But your eyes, almost unconsciously, drifted to the floor just beyond the edge of the rug where the footprints had appeared. The wood there was clean now, dry and bare. But something else caught your eye this time. A corner of paper just barely peeking out from beneath the chair's leg. You crouched down slowly, reaching toward the folded square. It was damp at the edges, fragile to the touch, as if it had been soaked through and then carefully left to dry. You unfolded it with caution. The paper crackled faintly in your hands. There was no envelope, no address. Just a short sentence written in a hand you hadn't seen in years. The ink had bled slightly into the fibers of the paper, but the words were still legible. "I'm sorry, but I had to come back." That was all. No name, no date, no explanation. Just that single line, suspended like breath in cold air. You stared at it for a long time, your mind scrambling to attach it to a face, to a voice, to a moment in time where it might have made sense. But only one person ever wrote like that. And they were gone. You held the note like it might dissolve in your hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, slightly rushed, as though written quickly, perhaps under pressure. It belonged to someone you hadn't thought of in a long time, or rather, someone you had avoided thinking about. It had been 5 years since they vanished, swallowed by the world one rainy night, just like this. No calls, no letters, no goodbyes, just an absence that hollowed out something in you that never quite grew back. You'd searched at first, asked questions, made calls, waited by the door, but nothing came. And slowly, with effort, you learned to accept that some stories just don't end neatly. Some people leave and take the explanation with them. And now here it was, years later, this note like an echo, bouncing back from a place you'd sworn you'd sealed. The tea sat forgotten on the counter. You wandered back toward the living room, the note still in your fingers. Every inch of the apartment felt different now. The furniture hadn't moved. The air hadn't changed. But something about the space felt newly inhabited, as though your solitude had been silently shared. You stared at the paper again. "I'm sorry, but I had to come back." Had to. Not wanted to, not chose to. The phrasing lingered in your mind. It suggested obligation, not desire. A return not out of sentiment, but necessity. But why here? Why now? You glanced again toward the window. The sky was beginning to darken slightly, not from time, but from clouds, bruised and gathering once again. You tried to convince yourself this could be a coincidence, that maybe the note had been misplaced during a move, tucked into a book, fallen from a shelf, that maybe the footprints were a trick of the light, a condensation leak, something explainable. But you already knew better. The steps, the sound, the chair, and now this message. Each piece was fitting into a quiet, reluctant pattern. Something or someone was returning, not through the front door, but through the rain. You thought back to the voice you once heard late at night, the warmth that used to fill this space when they were here. How their shoes used to leave puddles near the door. How they always forgot to bring an umbrella. Those memories had dulled over time, like old photographs left in the sun. But now they came back sharply. And not because you wanted them to. You placed the note on the table and stood back, staring at it, like you might at an old scar you'd nearly forgotten was there. The apartment was silent. The rain hadn't started yet, but you could feel it in your bones, in that peculiar, instinctive way certain people can sense weather. You moved toward the window and looked out. The street below was empty. No one walked past. No cars rolled by. The world felt paused, suspended in a breath. And in that breath, you felt a shift behind you. Not a sound, not a breeze, just a change, like the weight of another presence, lightly leaning on the atmosphere. You turned, expecting nothing, and seeing exactly that. The room remained as it was, but the quiet was different now. It didn't feel empty. It felt shared. Eventually, you picked up the note again and placed it in the drawer of your side table. You didn't know why. Maybe to keep it safe. Maybe because part of you didn't want to leave it out where it could disappear again. You went through the rest of the day in a kind of fog. The apartment held you like a secret. Still, muted, waiting. You didn't go out. You barely ate. You kept glancing at the window as the sky dimmed further. The rain was coming again. You didn't need a forecast. You didn't need to hear the first drop. You could feel it in the way the light shifted, in the way your skin tingled near the back of your neck. And with that rain, you knew, would come the next step. That night, you left the hallway light on. You told yourself it was because of the note, that you wanted to see clearly. But really, it was because the dark no longer felt truly empty. You sat in your chair again, the one they used to sit in, and waited. You didn't pick up your book. You didn't make tea. You just listened. The rain came quietly at first, a gentle tapping on the roof, then a harder rhythm against the glass, and beneath it, yes, there it was, that same sound, tap, 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 closer this time, more sure. You didn't get up, you didn't turn your head, you simply whispered, as softly as you could. Why now? No one answered. But the next sound wasn't a step. It was a sigh. Light, soft, familiar. The kind of exhale you once knew by heart. And in that moment, with the rain painting the windows and your breath catching in your chest, you realized, whatever this was, it wasn't finished yet. It had only just begun. The rain didn't stop for hours. It came down in waves, soft at first, then stronger, like a memory returning more vividly with each passing moment. You stayed in the chair most of that time, your eyes fixed on the hallway, listening for more sounds. But after the sigh, there was nothing. No steps, no creaks, no voices. Only the steady percussion of water on glass, a rhythm too familiar to feel foreign. It reminded you of nights long ago, when you used to listen to the rain with someone beside you. Your silence shared, not lonely. Now that quiet had changed. It wasn't isolation anymore. It was anticipation. You didn't know what you were waiting for exactly, but your body knew how to wait. The same way old wounds know how to ache before the weather shifts. When the rain finally eased into a whisper, you stood and crossed the room carefully, as though not to disturb whatever fragile veil had settled over the apartment. You walked to the front door and pressed your hand against it. Still locked. You opened it anyway, just to be sure. The hallway outside was empty, its carpet darkened slightly by humidity. No signs of footsteps, no neighbors. You stepped out for just a moment and looked up at the stairwell that led down to the street. There were no wet prints, no evidence that anyone or anything had come up that way. Just the muffled sounds of the city preparing for another soaked evening. You stepped back inside, closed the door, and this time you locked it more out of habit than fear. Because deep down you were starting to understand. Locks weren't keeping this out. They never had. Back in the living room, something was different. The lamp, always flickering faintly in the corner, now shone with an unusually steady glow. You tilted your head, puzzled. It had never worked consistently since you moved in, and you'd always blamed the wiring. But now it glowed like new, casting a warm circle of light across the rug and part of the wall. There, in that light, was something else that hadn't been there moments before. A new footprint. Just one. A single damp print, right at the edge of the rug, where wood met fabric. You hadn't heard a step, but there it was, darker than the rest of the floor, fresh. You stared at it for a long while, not moving. You weren't afraid, not anymore. But your breath caught slightly, like it had to make room for something unspoken. You approached the footprint slowly. There was no trail this time, just that one mark, facing slightly toward the window. The one you never opened. The glass was fogged with moisture from the rain outside. But beyond it, you could still see the faint outlines of the city lights, blurred and soft. And then, for the first time since this all began, you noticed something reflected in the glass that shouldn't have been there. Not behind you, but beside you. A shape. Just a shape. Too indistinct to call human, but not shapeless. A presence. It stood silently, unmoving, like someone waiting in line for a name they'd long forgotten. You turned your head quickly, but nothing was there. Only the room, only the steady light, only the print. That night, sleep came slowly. When it did, it was deep and dreamless. The kind of sleep that felt like slipping beneath a current, not drowning, but being carried somewhere you didn't recognize. And when you woke, the rain was gone, the sky pale with early morning, and the footprint had dried. You stood in the center of your living room, your arms wrapped around yourself, and said aloud, for the first time, "You can come in." The words surprised you, not because they'd been spoken, but because of how natural they'd felt, like you'd been meaning to say them all along. There was no reply, no sudden gust of air, no sound of arrival, just stillness. But something had shifted, something had heard you. You began leaving the lamp on overnight. You placed the note back under the chair, not hidden, just there, resting quietly like a signal. You didn't tell anyone. Who would believe you anyway? Your life continued on the surface. You still bought groceries. You still checked your mail. But inside, the apartment became something else. A place between places. Not haunted, not cursed, just revisited. The footprints appeared only when the rain fell. Never before, never after, only during. You began to watch the weather with new intention, marking the forecast with a sense of intimacy, the way some people track old scars or birthdays. And then one evening, you heard something new. A knock. Not loud, not insistent, just two soft taps on the wall near the window. You walked over slowly and placed your hand against the pane. It was cold. Outside, the streetlights blurred through the fogged glass, but no one was there. You pressed your forehead lightly to the window, eyes closed. In the silence that followed, you whispered, "Why did you leave?" The question hung there, unanswered. But you weren't looking for an answer anymore. You just needed the question to exist in the air between you, to give shape to the weight you'd been carrying, to give space for something else to settle in its place. You went to bed that night with the window curtain slightly parted, a corner of the sky visible from your pillow. And sometime between one breath and the next, you heard a faint sound, paper shifting. You rose, not rushed, and returned to the living room. The note had moved, not far, just slightly, enough to notice, enough to say, "I'm still here." You picked it up. Nothing had changed. Same sentence, same ink. But on the back now, there was a faint mark, not a word, not a message, just a fingerprint, damp, blurred, familiar. You began to notice the changes subtly at first. The wallpaper near the back hallway, a faded floral pattern you'd always meant to replace, began to ripple slightly in the evenings. Not visibly at first. It was more like a presence behind the surface, as if the walls themselves were remembering something they hadn't been asked to recall in years. You passed by that spot dozens of times before you finally stopped and placed your palm against it. The surface was cool, soft in a strange way, like cloth that had soaked too long in rainwater. When you pressed gently, there was a faint give to it, like the wall might let your hand slip through if you pushed hard enough. But you didn't. Not yet. Something in you knew it wasn't time. You found yourself staring at the fingerprint on the back of the note longer than you expected, longer than was necessary. It was smudged, partial, almost ghostly, but it was there. Proof of something, of someone, a trace left with purpose. You tried not to let your mind spiral. You didn't analyze the shape, didn't try to match it in your memory. It didn't matter whose it was anymore. What mattered was that it had been left for you to find. You folded the note again with care and slid it into the drawer beside your reading chair, letting it settle beneath the small pile of half-finished crossword puzzles and dusty pens. The air around you was quiet, calm even, but beneath that stillness pulsed something else, an expectation that hadn't yet found a name. As the days passed, the echoes grew bolder. You began to hear soft scratches beneath the floorboards in the dead of night. Not frantic, not animalistic, but steady, measured, almost thoughtful. They weren't loud enough to startle you, only enough to stir your awareness, as though a memory were walking just beneath your feet. Once, when the rain tapped softly at the windows in the early morning hours, you awoke to find the wallpaper near the back room slightly peeled at the corner. It curled outward like a page from a book being turned by invisible fingers. Behind it, just barely visible, was something strange. Lines, hand-drawn perhaps, graphite or charcoal. You didn't pull it back further. Not yet. You went back to sleep instead, letting the mystery breathe. The next time it rained, the air inside the apartment felt denser. It wasn't heavy exactly. It was layered, like a room slowly filling with unspoken words. You lit a candle, not because you needed the light, but because it made you feel steadier. As the wick flickered, casting a soft halo around the living room, you caught the scent of something you hadn't encountered in years. Rain-soaked leather. Not strong, just faint. faint enough to feel like an echo. The scent clung to the room in the gentlest way, as though someone had taken off their coat and left it draped over a memory. You whispered a name, not loudly, not even consciously. It slipped from your mouth like breath, and for a heartbeat, the candle dimmed. You began to sit closer to the wallpaper now. You placed a chair nearby, angled just so, not facing it directly, but near enough to observe. Each night, especially when the rain came, the peeling edge lifted more. You could see now that what lay behind it wasn't just a line. It was a drawing. Faint, blurred, and old. It looked like a doorway. Not an exact replica of your apartment's door, but similar, stylized, impressionistic, as though someone had drawn it from memory or from dreams. Around it were tiny marks, tick-like shapes, clustered in 3s and 4s. You ran your fingers along them, and the wall felt soft again, not like drywall at all, but like parchment. When you leaned in close enough, you could swear you heard something behind the surface. Breathing. You didn't tell anyone. This wasn't the kind of thing you could explain without cheapening it. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't even surreal anymore. It was simply becoming part of the fabric of your life. Like how you know which floorboard creaks at night, or where the sun first lands through the blinds at dawn. The presence had woven itself into the rhythm of your home, and you let it. That night, before sleep, you whispered once again, not a name this time, but a welcome. "It's okay," you said softly into the room. "You can stay." And when you turned out the lights, the flickering stopped completely. Just a steady, warm glow, like the rain had calmed something that had long been restless. The final moment of certainty came on a quiet Wednesday evening, when the air was thick with the promise of a storm. The rain hadn't started yet, but the city outside had slowed, as if bracing for something important. You were cooking, a rare activity lately, when you heard it again. The knock, not on the door, not on the window, but inside the wall. 3 soft taps, deliberate. You turned off the stove and walked toward the sound. The wallpaper had lifted more now, revealing nearly the entire drawing behind it, the doorway, and now, beside it, a single handprint, slightly darker than the wall, slightly blurred. Your size, your shape, but not yours. You reached out, hand hovering just over it, but not touching. You didn't need to. You understood. This wasn't an attempt to scare you. It wasn't a haunting. It was a return. Not from the grave. Not from the past. But from somewhere in between. Somewhere only the rain knew how to reach. You closed your eyes and whispered, "I'm here." And from deep behind the wall, as gentle as a sigh slipping between dream and wakefulness, came a reply. Not in words, not in sound, but in warmth. The kind that doesn't touch skin, but memory. It rained that night. Not a gentle drizzle, or the rhythmic patter you'd grown accustomed to, but a full downpour, the kind that seems to cleanse rooftops, flood gutters, and press silence into the spaces between buildings. You lay in bed listening, not with unease, but with attention, as though the storm had something important to say. Your apartment felt different, the kind of different that doesn't shout, but lingers in the corners. The scent of the wood grew more pronounced, deep and damp, like an old dock stretching out over a forgotten lake. You could hear the rain in every wall, like it was being filtered through the memories of the space itself. You didn't move. You let it speak, and in between the heaviest bursts, you heard the unmistakable creak of a floorboard, soft, steady, and directly beneath your bed. You sat up, not startled, just quietly alert. The sound wasn't hurried or threatening. It was a single step, placed with care, like someone trying not to wake you. You swung your legs over the edge of the bed and let your feet rest against the cool floor. There were no lights on. You didn't need them. Your eyes had grown used to the way shadows moved in this place. You stood, slow and deliberate, and walked toward the hallway. Every part of the apartment was quiet except for the rain and the one floorboard, low, groaning softly now, as if under the weight of a memory heavier than your own. You followed it, not just the sound, but the sense of presence. The living room was empty, of course, but not vacant. The air was full, pressed gently inward, like the room was breathing with you. The footprints had returned. This time, they led not from the window or the chair, but from the very center of the room where no one had stepped. There were 4, perfectly spaced, moving toward the hallway that led to your bedroom. You knelt to examine them. They were fresh, the dampness still glistening in the low light that crept in from the kitchen. Your fingers hovered above the first one, and you noticed something new. Inside the print, barely visible, were lines. Fine, delicate patterns, almost like veins in a leaf, or the branching paths of a river. You blinked, looked closer. They weren't random. They formed something. A pattern. A map, maybe. Or a signature. Something meant only for you to see. You followed the prints back into the hall, step by step, feeling the floor give just slightly beneath your weight. The hallway had always felt narrow, but tonight it felt long, as if it had stretched itself to accommodate the past. The wallpaper near the back room had begun to curl more now. The drawing was nearly complete. A full archway, hands etched along the top, like they were reaching through from the other side. You brushed your fingers over them, expecting the cool feel of plaster. But the wall felt warm, not hot, not pulsing, just subtly alive, as though something had been waiting there, pressed just beyond reach, and the storm had finally softened the boundary enough to touch. You didn't open the back room that night. You simply stood there, one hand on the doorknob, and listened. There was breathing again, not labored, not unnatural. It matched yours. It waited when you held your breath, and exhaled when you did. You whispered something, just a single word. Stay. And it did. The prints remained through the night. They didn't fade as quickly this time. In the morning, when the rain stopped and the sun forced its way through the blinds, they were still there, fainter, but visible. You didn't clean them. You let them be, as if erasing them might erase whatever fragile bridge had begun to form. In the days that followed, the rain returned more frequently, light at first, then heavier, then near constant. With each storm, the apartment shifted in small ways. The walls seemed to hum at dusk. The floor creaked in familiar rhythms, never loud, always purposeful. You began to speak aloud more often. Not to yourself, not really, just to the space, little things. You'd say good morning as you passed the front door, or I'm home when coming back from errands. It wasn't strange. Not anymore. It felt respectful, like acknowledging a house guest who'd stayed longer than planned. And in turn, the apartment responded, not with words or visions, but in warmth, in silence that welcomed instead of isolated, in the quiet relief of being seen. One evening, while reading near the flickering lamp, the same one that had never once failed since the footprints began, you heard music, not loud, not even clear, just the faintest melody, like a lullaby played on an old record player 2 rooms away. You stood, walked toward the hallway, and listened. The music wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the walls, curling out from the seams of the apartment like a forgotten memory unspooling. You leaned in, pressed your ear to the spot near the peeling wallpaper, and closed your eyes. The tune was familiar. You didn't know from where, but your heart knew it. And for the first time in what felt like years, your eyes filled with tears. Not of fear, but of connection, of recognition. That night, before bed, you placed a glass of water on the floor near the footprints. Not out of ritual, but offering. A small gesture. The way one might leave a porch light on for someone who hasn't quite found their way home tone. You whispered, for you. And just as you turned to leave, you saw it. Condensation forming inside the glass, though the room was cool. It clung to the sides like breath. You didn't touch it. You left it where it was and returned to your room. Heart beating not faster but fuller. The floorboard beneath your bed sighed once as you lay down. Not groaning, not warning, just exhaling. Like something had settled in. You slept soundly that night. No dreams, no visits, just peace. The kind that doesn't need explanation, just presence. In the soft rhythm of the rain against the windows. In the warmth of the air that no longer felt stale. In the way your apartment finally felt like home. Not because you were alone in it, but because you weren't. The rain had been falling all day, a quiet and steady hush that seemed to tuck itself into the folds of your apartment like a blanket. By now, it no longer felt like something external. It was as much a part of the space as the worn armchair in the corner, or the faint tea stains on the counter you never quite cleaned. It was present, but no longer foreign. That afternoon, when the clock ticked into an hour that felt neither early nor late, you walked barefoot to the window. You didn't look out. You hadn't for a while now. What was out there no longer felt as important. Instead, you watched the droplets race each other down the glass and wondered if the one who left the footprints was still watching too, from behind the veil of water and wall. The footprints had faded during the day, their outlines growing softer, more delicate. They hadn't vanished. No, they were still there. But now they seemed like impressions left in fog rather than wetness. You bent down to trace the path again. Each time you did, you noticed something new. This time it was a tiny mark just beside the final print, like the tail end of a question mark. Not drawn, not etched, but formed naturally by the way the moisture had dried. A punctuation, maybe, or a symbol. You sat beside it, legs folded beneath you, and simply listened. The room didn't speak, not the way it used to, but it breathed. You could feel the subtle expansion of its silence, like an inhalation waiting for you to respond. Later that evening, when the light outside dimmed and the shadows lengthened just enough to blur the edges of your furniture, you lit the candle again. The same one you'd lit during the first storm. It was smaller now, melted into a shallow pool with only half its original height remaining, but its light was still steady. You carried it to the hallway and placed it beneath the wallpaper. The drawing had grown faint, almost transparent now. You could still see the doorway, but it no longer looked sketched or charcoal rough. It shimmered faintly like ink in water. The hands along the top had receded, no longer reaching, but folded back as if resting, waiting. You reached up, fingers brushing the air just above them. This time, there was no warmth. Not because it was gone, because it had moved. You felt it in the floorboards as you walked. They no longer creaked. They flexed, gently. Beneath each step was a rhythm that matched your own. It was no longer haunting. It was accompaniment. The apartment had learned your pace, your pauses, your sighs. It had taken them in and made them part of its song. As you moved through the rooms, you began to hum, something tuneless, something small. And as you did, you heard the air respond, like a voice moving just beneath the melody, not echoing you, but harmonizing. It wasn't eerie. It was beautiful, in the way things are when they no longer ask to be understood, only felt. You closed your eyes and let yourself walk that way, led more by the presence than your sight. When you reached the back room, the door was slightly open. You hadn't left it that way, or maybe you had. You couldn't remember, but it didn't matter now. You placed your hand on the edge and nudged it open. Inside, the space was not what it had once been. The furniture remained, a dresser, a folded chair, boxes still sealed from the move. But the light had changed. It didn't come from the window. It came from the walls, soft and pale and pulsing like candlelight in slow breath. On the far wall, where there had once been nothing but peeling paint, was now a reflection, not a mirror, but a shape that shimmered with your outline as you stepped closer. But it wasn't quite you. The posture was different. The expression was softer, like someone you used to be, or someone you were still becoming. You sat down on the chair and waited. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't speak. And that was when the silence broke. Not loudly, but gently. From behind you came the soft sound of footsteps. Not wet, not heavy, just present. You didn't turn right away. You closed your eyes first, counted to 5, then stood. And when you turned, there was no one there. But the floor was damp in the shape of 2 new footprints side by side, just behind your own. No more trail, no more wandering. Just stillness, like the journey had ended. You placed your foot beside them and smiled. And for the first time in what felt like years, your chest felt open, unguarded. You weren't alone. Not anymore. That night, the rain stopped. Not all at once, but gradually, like a song fading to its last note. You opened the window, just a crack, and breathed in the cool air. The city beyond was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows understanding. You stood in the center of your living room and looked around. The footprints had faded completely now. Not erased, just released. The drawing beneath the wallpaper had vanished too, the paper smooth and whole again, as if it had always been that way. And yet you knew better. You had been there, you had seen, you had listened, and something had listened back. You touched the wall one final time, whispered your thanks and let it rest. When you turned off the last light and slid beneath your covers, the room felt full, but not crowded, not invaded, full the way a heart feels when all the pieces have returned to their place. You heard one final creak, soft and familiar, from the hallway, and then silence. Deep, clean silence. Not empty, not haunted, just peace. And in that silence you drifted, not away from the world, but deeper into it, where no rain was needed, where no footprints had to remain, because some connections don't require reminders. They live in the space you made for them, and they stay, quiet and kind, even after the rain ends. Thank you for spending your evening here with us, in the gentle quiet of the Cozy Storytime. I hope this journey through Soggy Footprints brought you a little peace, a little stillness, and maybe even a soft sense of wonder. Sometimes the calmest stories leave the deepest echoes, not in our minds, but in our hearts, like footprints that vanish with the rain, but leave something behind inside us, something we carry gently into the night. As the final notes of this story fade, let yourself drift. There's no need to hold on to the plot or puzzle through the mystery. Let the rain wash through your thoughts, slow and rhythmic. Let the creaking floorboards become part of your dreams. Maybe you'll find yourself walking through those quiet hallways again, guided not by fear, but by curiosity, and a soft pull towards something kind and unseen. Wherever your mind goes now, may it be gentle, safe, and healing. Before you go, remember to like the video and subscribe to the Cozy Storytime if you haven't already. There's always room for you here. We'll be waiting with another story tomorrow night. Another little door to a quiet world, just for you. For now, rest easy. You've made it through the day. The storm has passed. The footprints have faded. And sleep is just around the corner. Good night, dear dreamer. Let the rain carry you home.
you.